Hi, everyone. Really welcome from wherever you are zooming in from. I'm really excited to be here tonight. I think you're in for a treat. We have three really amazing photographer artists who are going to talk about the work that they so generously donated. And they will talk for a bit about the work, and then we'll have some questions and answers at the end. So if you do have questions, please type them in the chat, and then I'll read them when we get to that. So without further ado, we're going to start off tonight with Michael Kenna. Michael?
Good evening, everybody. Hopefully I'm around, and cheers to you all. I noticed that I was the only one who didn't mute my camera when people started talking, because I'm really not used to these Zoom sessions at all. But I'm very delighted to be here this evening. I've never spoken for 10 minutes without questions, I think, so this will be very interesting. Let me tell you a little bit about myself. I'm presuming there are people out there who have never heard of me, although I've been doing this now for 48 years. Even though I look as though I started when I was 2. I was born and brought up in England. I studied to be a Catholic priest and decided that perhaps that wasn't a great way of going through life. I went to art school and I discovered photography, and I've been a photographer ever since. One could say, looking back over all those years, that the work I do is about the juxtaposition, the relationship, even the confrontation, hostility between the landscape, organic material, and the structures that we put on the landscape. My first job getting out of photography school was working for a photographer named Anthony Blake, in which I had to walk his 2 dogs, Hassel and Blad, down the river, and often River Thames in England. And I remember an experience one time because the tide would come up. And I remember thinking, oh, I can always outchase the tide, it's no problem along the river. One time I didn't. And I ended up stuck up in a tree with 2 dogs for 2 hours, which was quite an experience, but it reminds me of this particular photograph that I have in front of me right now. I photographed, fortunately, wonderfully, all around the world. I've loved photographing for years and years. One of the commissions I had a number of years ago was to photograph in an archipelago just off Granville in France called the Chausey Islands. And I spent, I went a couple of times there. I spent a week at a time, living in a tiny little hut basically, and kind of wandering around day and night. I was asked at the beginning whether, as a photographer, I pay attention to the tides. And as you've noticed from my Richmond experience, that the tides are very important to me. I can get into big trouble if I don't know when the tides are coming in. So this particular structure that we see in front of us here is the docking place for the ferries that come in and out. The tides around the Chausey Islands go up and down greatly. So one can walk out actually for miles. There are 365 islands in this archipelago. One can walk even between islands sometimes. But when the tide comes up, you are in trouble if you're anywhere near the beach. So this particular occasion, very early in the morning, I was photographing. I love to photograph early in the morning. The tide was rising, and I found that I was going further and further up the hillside behind me in order to capture this. And I was, like the Richmond days, was kind of stuck, not up a tree, but up this hillside. The exposure, it looks to me, I don't really write down my exposures very much anymore, but it looks to me it's 30 minutes or so. Much of my work is about long exposure photography. I love the way that the water becomes almost ice, clouds become mist, and it becomes quite unspecific, somewhat enigmatic. I am a somewhat traditional photographer. I work in black and white, always have done. I've done many commercial assignments in color, but it's not my chosen medium as such. I really prefer what I feel is the poetry, the kind of the essence of black and white, which allows the imagination to run riot and create our own scenes in some way. And I'm still traditional enough that I work with analog, manual Hasselblads, often on tripods, hyperfilm processed. I insist upon printing everything myself. So this particular print that is being offered today is a handmade silver gelatin print, printed by me in my own darkroom, hand-toned, hand-retouched, hand-dry mounted, hand matte cutted, and presented to Los Angeles for hopefully selling for multi-billions of dollars. I think, I don't know how long I've been talking, but maybe we'll stop here. If you have questions, please just write them down, send them in, and happy to answer them. And thank you very much. Cheers again.
Thanks so much, Michael. That was great. We're going to move right along. Shawn, Theodore. Shawn, you there?
Yes, I am. Can you see me clearly?
Yes, thanks.
All righty. Wow, where do I even begin? I'm Shawn Theodore. I started out in image making through painting first. I went to Tyler School of Art. I was unsatisfied with the curriculum there. And unsatisfied leaves a lot to be desired. I should explain why. There, at the time that I was there, the type of work that I wanted to make wasn't being it wasn't received very well. So I was leaning into a lot of West African sculpture, a lot of sort of African American traditional painting, things that were not necessarily derived from the curriculum at that time. This was 88, 89. And I found myself, kind of walking away from Tyler, but always keeping my artistic practice in my life. My mother was a nature photographer, so I sort of decided I would take her camera from her when she decided not to shoot anymore, and that was a Pentax K1000. It's literally my favorite camera, and I still have it to this day. I love making images that are representative of obviously African American life or African Americans, but also I enjoy diving into space that I call Afromythology. And that space basically looks at the sort of imagined space of African American life that doesn't exist. There is no sense of African American mythology. There is folklore, there is spiritual sort of conjecture and storytelling, but there's no mythology. So the image that we're looking at here is actually an image that I was inspired to create from a painting. And the painting is Bashi Bazouk by Jean-Léon Gérôme. And I tried to depict the individual in the painting as much as possible. And this is a subject who, at the time, this is when Orientalism was sort of in full swing, but it was an imaginary character. And I felt it was important to take the time to go back in and investigate the sort of subject and see what was going on with the subject and bring it into the contemporary space. So I have a series of work around this individual. This individual is called Obelisk. This is Obelisk the Martyr. And it's one of my absolute favorite characters in my series of work I've been working on since, wow, I'm trying to remember when I met this individual. I met him in 2015, so we've been shooting since late 2015 up until 2019. And we've been creating this storyline ever since. Part of what I like to do is create freedom around individuals who, quite frankly, you find them in spaces that leave no sort of conversation around who they are, or their agency is subtracted in some way. And what I do on a day-to-day basis, the work that I do, I'm a history of photography professor, so I work to decolonize the camera. So much of the work that I do is to bring subject matter that helps describe that and bring it to life. So I'm very proud of this particular piece in a lot of ways. This is kind of an Easter egg as well. Like there's always an Easter egg in all of my photos that connect one series to the next. So there's a lot of things happening in this piece that I'm really proud of. But the one thing I can tell you about this piece, the making of this piece, it was a very hot summer's day. And as I told you before, I came from a painter's background. So you're looking at an individual who is actually painting. I took the time to paint this individual, the color that you see, that deep, rich, like ebony black color of skin. So it was very challenging in 90-degree heat with maybe 3 or 4 layers and this headdress on to complete this job. But as you can see in his face, it's a very cool sense of calm, professionalism all the way through. And we really achieved something that was phenomenal. So if there's any other questions, I'd be happy to answer them, or we can move right along.
Thanks so much, Shawn. We are going to move on to Fran. We'll take questions at the end, Shawn. People will write them in and I'll read them out. But Fran, you're next.
First of all, I'm very honored to be in this panel with Michael and Shawn, whose work I really respect. My background, like many of us, has gone through, or my journey has gone through many iterations. I was always drawing as a child. I was drawing and painting, and went to college in the 60s and felt that artwork was not something that I should be doing because the world was a mess, and I found it was just too narcissistic to do art for art's sake. So I felt that I should save the world. And I got a master's in psychiatric social worker, but I didn't save the world. I didn't really save anybody. And while I was working with heroin addicts, I realized I was actually much more interested in designing my office space than listening to their problems. So I quickly realized I needed to think about going back to art, which took a few years, getting together a portfolio in which I could apply to a graduate program. And I got my MFA from Boston University in graphic design, not in photography. But while I was in the graphic design program, I was in the darkroom the entire time. And I realized working in the darkroom and working in photography that I could really express myself better in photographs than I could with my drawings. But I had to make a living, and I worked as a graphic designer for a couple decades. And while I was working, the computer revolution occurred, and I just jumped right into it and started creating photo collages around 1990, 1991, with the beginning of Photoshop, again, using my training in design, but also my background in drawing and painting. So the kind of work that I do really is what has been called photo painting, different than what Shawn is doing. He actually paints on his subjects. I paint digitally, and I paint on my photographs digitally after I combine various different scenes. And this particular image, which is called Penny's Diner, is a little bit different. The story behind this is that I was in Marfa the last time I was able actually to travel before the pandemic hit. So this was the very end of 2019. I was on my way to El Paso. I had been staying in Marathon, Texas. It was early in the morning. We're speeding along at 80 miles an hour to get to the airport so I could go home. And I saw as a little blur this diner, and it was just astonishing. So I made the driver turn around and it took a while for him to get back to where we started from, or to find the diner, because he had been going 80 miles an hour. But we came back, I jumped out of the car and I started shooting this diner. And it was actually early in the morning. So this is not a diner that's composited, but an actual photograph. But I can't just leave things alone. I have to work on an image. So I started working on this around the time that there was a very unpleasant experience here in the United States, in which anti-Asian sentiment became extremely obvious. People were somehow conflating the pandemic with Asians. And I had previously photographed this young woman, this young Asian woman, and decided that she would be the one who would sit or stand in the diner. And I have her in a stance of confidence, of self-reliance, but alone. She is on her own in this diner. This is what I've donated to LACP. I think it's one of my favorite images from over this past year. There's a lot that resonates with me. I would be open to any questions you may have, but I just want to point out that this is a painted image, in that I've enhanced aspects of the image of the diner, but I use the architecture and I use the structure of the image to work with. So if you should find yourself in the southwest part of Texas on Route 80, I encourage you to stop at Penny's Diner. It was closed when I was there, but I think if you go there, you'd be really impressed and hopefully remember this image.
Thanks so much, Fran. That was wonderful. And I just want to let everyone know that Janice has put links to all the works on Artsy in the chat. So if you want to take a look and get more information about bidding, you'll find it in the chat, the links there. We are going to take some questions now. We have one question. So if you have any curiosity about how these amazing works were done, or the process, or anything else, please put your questions in the chat and I will read it off. But we have one question from one of our favorite people, Debbie Arlick, and she says, "Hi, Michael, I'm a longtime fan. Your work reaches into the soul. Could you talk about how spirituality influences your work and address your strong graphic aesthetic?" Michael?
I had to remember to unmute it. I feel very clever. Thank you, Debbie. It's very, very kind question. I could give you a 5-hour answer or a 5-minute answer. I will address the 5-minute answer. I think spirituality has been very important throughout my life and throughout my career. As I mentioned, I did have the intention to become a Catholic priest. Religion was very important to me as a child and as a boy. That grew, I think, into a great respect for all religions and for many rituals. One of the very important aspects, I think, of Catholicism when I was growing up, I was an altar boy, everything else, was the light on the altar, which symbolized the presence of a deity, an unseen deity. This has remained with me consistently throughout my life. You know, I could say that I'm, agnostic now insofar as I, have no proof either way of what God is, whether God exists, whether God is in the landscape. But my tendency is to think there is something there. But because of that light in the altar, I think I've always believed that what we see is what is not, it's not what is actually there, that there is far more. And I've always looked for that in my photography. I've always preferred the power of suggestion as opposed to the description of the surface. I've always felt that, like the poetry of haiku means so much more for me than a full-length novel, because it allows my imagination to think about and to feel and to sense that there is something behind the surface. That is for me a certain sense of spirituality. When I go to Japan, of course, there's the Shinto religion, Buddhism, which I'm very strongly attracted to also. In Shinto, they believe that the gods, the deities, whatever we want to call them, exist in the landscape, in the islands, in the trees, and they put little torii gates and shrines everywhere. And again, that kind of respect, reverence, homage, being humble in front of creation, whatever creation is an integral part of what I do as a photographer. I think you mentioned graphics also. I'm with Fran in this. Is that when I went to art school, I just had no idea whether I wanted to become a graphic designer or a photographer. I loved both, and I remember going to one college in London College of Printing. I had an interview with the photography department in the morning and the graphics department in the afternoon. The photography department accepted me, and being a teenager, I never went to the graphics interview, and as a result I became a photographer. But graphics has remained very, very strong part of my work. So to the point when I'm photographing, I often photograph without my glasses, so the landscape is blurry. I can see shapes and forms. I kind of work around the rectangle. When I print, I often print my images upside down, so we're in the developing tray. So I'm not, I don't say this is a tree, this is a building, whatever, it's a shape. I'm very attracted and almost seduced by the graphics of a rectangle, how shapes work within that. In my case right now, it's a square. I've been going to Hokkaido a lot, in the north of Japan, and kind of my work has gone more and more to the minimal. So I'm working with just almost like kanji characters on white canvas backgrounds. And again, the graphic aspect of the work is incredibly important. So thanks for the question. I hope I haven't gone on too long.
Thanks, Michael. Next question is from Ian Wright, and he writes, all three images seem to pose more questions rather than provide answers. How important is this for all three fantastic photographers? And would any of you like to answer? Hopefully all three. You want me to read it again? All three images seem to pose more questions rather than provide answers. And how important is this for all three fantastic photographers? Shawn?
I should hand it over to one of.
I'll jump in, Mike.
Good, Shawn. Thank you.
Yeah. I think that's the nature of the photograph, is to leave more questions than it answers. I think that's the nature of a great photograph, is that it compels you to think about what else is happening that's further than the frame. The frame itself gives you a stable place to understand that there's an image taking place within the borders, but there's so much that happens within that frame. So I'm pouring my sense of culture and religion and conjecture about art, what is my archive? What is my presumed archive into the rectangle, or into the square? I think it's important that we always present work that does that for the rest of our family, our human family, that we actually take the time to think and wonder what if, because when you do that, you create empathy. And empathy creates a greater understanding of the photographic image, but also the image taker and whoever else may look at that image. So for me, it's a wonderful question. I think it's one of those things that should always lead outward to connect to the next person. I don't think the answer is always in that frame.
Shawn, go ahead, Fran. I'm sorry.
Okay, I agree with Shawn. For me, it's really the process of creation that poses questions. And whenever I start working on an image, I have no preconceived idea of where it's going to go, as opposed to many photographers who plot out what they want to do. And I'm very envious of that process. It's not the way that I work. I find that it's using my intuition, and it's using the creative process that helps me understand what I'm trying to get to, but it's not preconceived. And quite often it's not until I see the final image, when I'm finally satisfied with an image, and I can't figure out what else I might do, either to ruin it or to perfect it. When I feel that it's finished, then I start to understand what it was that I was trying to achieve. But really, for me, it's really the intuitive process. It's the merging of objects, using my graphic background as much as possible, using my understanding of history, of artistic history, and then feeling comfortable with the result. And that's how I come to the conclusion, and that's how I come to the answers.
Michael, thanks, Fran.
I would say that, reaching my, late stage 60s at this point, one thing I do know is that I know very little. And the more I live, the less I know. And I find that questions are integral to artwork also. I mean, I agree with Shawn and Fran in this respect. I have one particular photograph made in the 80s of a schoolyard in the north of Yorkshire, in which it has these really strange parallel wiggly lines that run through the playground. And I photographed this back in 1983, I think it was. It remains one of my favorite photographs. I always thought I should go in to the school and ask, well, what's the point of these wiggly lines? Is it some, drunk driving test, or, bicycle proficiency, or, what are they for? And every time I stop myself finding the answer, because I know that once I know the answer, the photograph will have very little interest for me. It's the intrigue, it's this constant kind of searching for kind of quizzical possibilities that I think attracts, myself certainly, and I hopefully other viewers, into a photograph, because they want to be on that kind of stage. They want to be in that space. They want to, use their head, their soul, their mind, their body to kind of figure things out. And the figuring things out is the conversation. It is the equation. It is the kind of that's the point of the photographer in many ways. It's kind of the relationship of, photographer, subject matter, viewer, and kind of what happens in between.
Thanks, Michael. Hey, Shawn, I just want to circle back to you for a second. Apropos of this question, you kind of teased us with the Easter egg in the image, but can you give us a hint about what that might be?
So for every image within this body of work, there's an object within it that appears either backwards or forwards. It just keeps leaping forward, so that you're able to tie the storyline together visually, rather than having a written sort of didactic to lead you through it. I enjoy when people are searching through the image and trying to find the piece, but then trying to find the piece in other pieces. It opens up the journey, and the journey is imagined. It is not a documentarian's tale of what you see around yourself all day and every day. This is my imagination at work, but my imagination at work for a full culture, to have language around mythology. So I'm pushing people to look for those Easter eggs, so that they push themselves through what this set of images may or may not be. And the things that come back are just great. So in this particular image, it's the rope that ties the crown together. And it shows up in another piece that's very important, but you'll have to find it. So,
Thank you. Now we have to look at the rest of the series to kind of see that continuity.
Okay, just say one thing. I think what Shawn's saying is that photographers are essentially magicians and also manipulators.
way better than painters, I say.
Fran, I have a question for you from Debbie Arlick. Fran, thank you for helping to change the world with your photography. Can you talk about why you chose dubious access to the diner entry. You're muted, you have to unmute. Fran, yeah.
Why did I choose dubious access?
To the diner entry, yes.
Okay, well, first of all, I didn't get into the diner. It was closed. So I had to recreate. What I was impressed with was the way the light from that very early Texas morning was falling on the metal and the shiny part of the diner. It was just really beautiful and luminous. And if you've ever been to this part of Texas, Southwest Texas, it's very, very flat and very arid. So the diner popped out as something completely magical, completely out of character for the landscape. That was one thing that impressed me with it. And the other was the way, as I said, the light was falling into it. I had to recreate the interior of the diner because it was dark. It was morning and there was no one there. So I have photographed other diners and was able to composite parts of other diners into that particular diner. If I understand the question, Debbie, it's what was it that was appealing to me about stopping the car at that point? And I think it really was the strange architecture, the out of placeness of it, the ambiguity, and the light, the patterns of light falling on the exterior of the diner. I hope that answers your question, Debbie.
Thank you, Fran.
Debbie has actually added, she added, sorry, Peter, she added in a little clarification.
Sure.
What she says is, I mean, I don't see a walkway or entry to the door, Fran.
There was none. Isn't that odd? I didn't see one. I don't know. I don't know where it was. I never saw one. It added to the mystery. But that was very observant of you to notice that. And it looked, again, it made it look so out of the ordinary and so surreal. It's an actual diner, but in the middle of nowhere on this barren field in Southwest Texas. So thank you for noticing that.
A couple of comments. Nancy Mack said, thank you all three for feeding our souls. And Olga Mero said, thank you a lot to all the artists. Thank you, LACP. I had a question. We were having a discussion, Shawn and Michael, and then Fran joined in about working in color, working in black and white, and how integral that was to your work, and how you see things through those different mediums. I was wondering if anybody wanted to comment a little bit more on that, but also had kind of a sub question. And as Fran, you and Shawn work very much in color, and it's so powerful, such a party work. And Michael, your black and white work is so graphic and resonating. Have you ever tried working in like the opposite? And what was your experience? And what made you kind of like either not pursue it or anything? Just kind of curious.
Well, I'm working in black and white. I just haven't shown anybody. I'm very choosy about the work that I allow out of my sort of tiny universe. But I have a body of work that's film and digital, that's black and white. I love black and white. I mean, my appreciation for color comes from being able first to just shoot in black and white and just understand what I can do with color. And for me, color, as we spoke about earlier, this is it's a form of language. Color as a cultural tool is really important, right? So when I'm shooting in black and white, I'm informing myself of things that frame my knowledge base, or even if it's not frames, it might be the rails, or it might be the thing that pushes information over my head or under my head. I'm always enjoying creating in spaces and places that I'm not necessarily known for doing, but maybe in 10 years I'll put the black and white stuff out. I'm 50 now, so I'm young, and we'll figure it out.
I don't shoot in black and white. I've tried, and I feel as if it's not part of my life. It's not part of the way that I look at the world. And when I've shot in black and white, or when I've worked in black and white, or turned images into black and white, I feel something's missing. It doesn't have the emotional resonance that I'm looking for. But I do look at black and white, and I do look at my images in black and white just to look at the graphic component of them. So it's a really good way to look at your shapes, the way that Michael was talking about it, to look at your shapes, to look at the geometry, to look at the symmetry. You can see that more clearly in black and white. But for me, it's just a guide. It's not the final piece. We all dream in color, at least I dream in color, and I think in color, and I emote in color. So I want to use it in my imagery.
Thanks, Fran. Michael?
Well, just like Shawn, I'm known for my black and white work, but I'm really a color photographer with very large digital prints. No, that's not true at all. Actually, I really don't do very much color at all. I started off as being a color photographer as a student. My senior thesis was on color body motion, as I was, trying to survive in the world. And I worked in color labs, printing color. I've done color advertising and commercial work and so forth, but I've just never taken to it. And it's, and I think that it just the three of us, the photographers here who have donated the prints. I mean, it just shows the amazing, wonderful world of photography of differences. How we can all see things differently. We can all do things differently. It doesn't matter if it's a silver print or a pigment print or what sort of print it is. It doesn't matter if you have huge prints or tiny prints or big editions or small editions, or whether it's digital or analog, whatever it is. I think it's just the differences is where the quality is. I just know that in my own work, every time I've tried other things like huge prints or digital prints or color prints, I've lived with them. And I've said, well, maybe they're okay, but it's not me. It hasn't felt comfortable. I've never felt I could put my name behind it somehow. It just never felt as part of me. So I remain completely dedicated to black and white for all the wonderful reasons why I feel black and white is fantastic.
Thank you, Michael. Yeah, I was looking at all three of your work earlier today, and I kept telling myself stunning was the word that just kept coming to me. And you all have such, wonderful, unique voices, as Michael, as you were just saying. It's when you just think you've seen it all, and then you realize, there's just so much more to be said. Thank you all for doing the work you do. Fran, Nancy Mack, maybe she's been through Texas, is the diner in Maria. There are other strange things there. Maybe she could tell us about what those are.
I meant Marfa, Texas.
It's not in Marfa. No, it's not. I was on my way to El Paso, so I was past Marfa. It's probably halfway between Marathon and El Paso, but not in Marfa. But I did go to Marfa, and I photographed a lot in Marfa. But no. Can I just say one more thing about color, by the way? As someone who lives and breathes color, I just want to make I want to make a push for color. Another reason that I use color, and I think Shawn, you do too, is it becomes part of the character, part of the story. And we don't just use, I'm sure this is true of Shawn, we don't just use color for color's sake. We use it to tell part of the story. There's a reason that certain colors are in certain places. And when you have a digital toolbox and you can pick any color of the billions of colors that are available, there's a reason that you should pick certain colors and not others. And that reason is to enhance your story, to enhance the narrative. So it's not arbitrary at all. Shawn, you might agree.
I definitely agree. Yeah. And I have to say, so, I mean, you see, I still have my coat on. I was coming in from a long day, but this is also what I had sitting with me this whole time. So Michael, this is to show you like black and white matters a great deal because I do so much work right here inside the lens to understand where I can go with color. This black and white monochrome baby does everything I need to school me forward. Yeah. And it does shape my understanding of where I'm going to be or how I'm going to present my next sort of body of color. I really utilize black and white to keep me sort of in understanding of what it is that people appreciate in black and white. So it's culturally specific for me, but it's also understanding how the graphic power of black and white pushes an eye into a story. So black and white is very important. Color is important. I mean, this is the great sort of debate of all photography, but I think it all can coexist as long as we are utilizing it in a way that matters. How do we utilize both to push forward? Like we're pushing the art form forward by understanding our boundaries, which is the wildest thing about photography.
Absolutely. I don't think there's any debate at all. It's just a matter of choice, purely.
Yeah.
When I teach my students, I tell them, that color has such a profound emotional, response from people, and photojournalists will often shoot in black and white. It's because if they're doing a story on famine, they don't want a beautiful sunset to kind of influence the viewer and maybe kind of, take them away from what the power of the story is supposed to be. So, these things all really kind of factor in. Thanks so much. Anybody have any questions before we close? Well, looks like, thank you all so much. It was wonderful hearing you, looking at your work, hearing about your process. And thanks so much for taking some time to join us today and for donating the prints.
Great pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.